Hi, I'm Prepper Fred. This is my new Harvest Right freeze dryer that I received 2 or 3 weeks ago. I've got maybe a little less than a dozen batches through it, and I've discovered just a lot of things in using it that I kind of wish I would have known prior to purchasing it. I don't think that these things would have changed my mind in buying the unit, but I thought I'd talk a little bit about them and a little bit about the setup and initial use, and it might be of use to someone else who's considering this unit. So we ended up deciding to buy this unit because some of the food that we wanted to preserve for long-term storage, we just couldn't preserve without it, and we couldn't buy it in the store, right? So, there's some cultural foods that we have in our area. We're in the American Southwest, and so things like red and green chilies are important in our cuisine, and we wanted to be able to preserve these foods, use them, and have some for long-term storage. So we wanted to purchase this. We ended up buying it. Got it on a Black Friday sale. Shipping costs and everything out the door was right about $2,200. It arrived in good shape on a pallet, all boxed up and shrink wrapped. The cabinet was in one unit. The vacuum pump was in another box on top of the unit. I was a little bit surprised at how substantial this was. And, even looking at the videos on Harvest Right, it looks big, but until you actually get it in your house, you don't really realize how big this is. And so, something that you might need to keep in mind, I'm fortunate in that I have a back bedroom that's not used. I put it on a cart. I'm using it in the back bedroom, and I'll put it in a closet when I have guests. This thing is big. So that's one of the cons, right? The chamber itself is large. The refrigeration unit is large. The pump is large. The pump weighs 40 pounds alone, and you can see that it takes up the best part of the real estate associated with this Harbor Freight cart. So you see on Harvest Right, you see these ladies in their kitchen with this thing operating in the background, and they're talking about how wonderful it is, and so that's all fine and good. However, you need to know that this thing's big. It's very noisy when you're running it, like substantially noisy. So almost like a car idling sort of noisy. And it also has a tendency to put out a little bit of odor too when it's brand new. The first time I ran it, I was like, oh my gosh, what the heck is going on? There's no way, this thing just stinks. And it turns out that there are some rubber mats that have heater elements in the rack for the trays. And I believe that odor that I was getting was coming from the outgassing of those trays. And in subsequent loads, it has diminished quite a bit. It's still present, but it's going away. And I'm hoping that it goes away with time to where it's just not noticeable at all. So it's big, it's heavy, it's noisy, it's a little bit stinky, and it generates a ton of heat. So this thing cools down to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And in doing that, it's got to do something with the heat that it takes out of the chamber, and so it's got a heat exchanger, as all air conditioning units do, and it puts that heat into the ambient air around it. And so this back bedroom gets really, really warm. So have it in your kitchen if you want the main part of your house to be hot, loud, and stinky. If not, figure out a better place for it. Some people put them in, I think, looks like they have them in shops. That's not an option for me. I've got a lot of dust in my shop, and I didn't want to have dust getting on the cooling fins for the refrigeration unit. So that's a bit of an issue. The other con that you need to know about is that the vacuum pump itself requires a significant amount of maintenance. And so what you have to do in between batches, and you don't have to do this if you don't want your pump to last, but if you want your pump to last, you have to drain the oil, you have to filter the oil, and then you have to separate the water out of the oil. Because the contaminants in the oil, whether it be tiny food particles or if it's the vapor that comes out of the unit and gets captured in the oil, those are harmful to your pump, to where the pump will no longer be able to reach its maximum ability to evacuate. And so that's an expensive pump. I would bet that pump, street price on it is probably in the order of $250 to $400. This is a new pump, by the way. Harvest Right just started shipping a new pump. The older pump, I think, was smaller, had a tendency to outgas a little bit of vaporized oil, and perhaps it wasn't capable of pulling as deep of a vacuum as quickly. That thing is a workhorse. It's an absolute beast, but you got to keep fresh oil in it. So what you need to do, let's say, okay, I don't care. I know it's noisy, I know it's loud, I know it's hot, I know it's going to be a little stinky. I'm going to buy one. So you buy it, and you got it on the way, and now you got to go, okay, where am I going to put it? So like if you're like us, get your cart ready to go, and it's going to ship with 1 bottle of oil. So mine shipped with this Robinair premium high vacuum pump oil. It's a mineral oil, and 1 quart is enough to get you through 1 batch. Because what happens is you process your very first batch, and then you go ahead and you drain the pump, and you notice that there's a little bit of water in there, and you run it through the filter that they send you. And this filter works pretty well, except that the filter itself is dry material, and so it holds a lot of oil that you're not going to get back. And then you have a little bit of water that forms in the oil that you've got to drain off. So between the oil that gets captured here and then the oil that you have to discard because it's got a little bit of water in it, you're going to need more oil really, really quick. So you can go to some place like a HVAC place in your town, someplace that sells water heaters and forced air heaters or air conditioning units, because anybody that does air conditioning work, they've got to have more of this mineral oil. And in this instance, I bought 3 more quarts of Yellow Jacket, and so I've got a total of 4 quarts. And in less than a dozen batches, I've used probably about maybe a half a quart of oil that I've had to discard or that I've lost, maybe a little bit more. And I figure I'm going to get probably 20 batches out of this before I have to just discard this oil and then start with fresh oil. Now, also on the 20th batch, the company tells you that you need to pull the front cover on your vacuum pump and clean off the front cover, because there gets to be some condensation of debris, and they want you to get in there and just clean it out good to make sure that you do good maintenance on the unit. So that's the other thing that I needed to know before I bought this, right? First thing I needed to know was how big it was, and that it was going to be stinky, and that it was going to use a lot of energy. It costs about $4 a load probably in terms of electricity to process food. It takes a long time to process food. So I've done things like ground beef, and I've done beef soup, and I've done split peas, and I've got pulled pork, and I've got milk, and I've done a bunch of other different things. It typically runs about, nothing's been any faster than about 20 hours. So I actually did a load of split peas, dried split peas, because I was going to put them in Mylar, and I realized that they felt a little sticky. They kind of felt wet. And I thought, I bet not all the moisture's out. So I stuck it in the freeze dryer, and I had 20 cups by volume of peas in this unit, and it generated almost a quarter of a gallon of water. So there's a ton of water that's in that. When I did 4 trays of hamburger, it did a half a gallon of water. So you're gonna be generating a lot of water with this too. So get oil, know how to do the maintenance on the pump, and be prepared for it being a little bit bigger and noisier than maybe you were expecting. So the really nice thing about this is that the quality of the food is exceptional that comes out. So, perhaps you've had freeze-dried foods before, and, on a camping trip or whatever, and you got the blueberry cobbler and you added the hot water, and maybe it didn't taste so good. Well, the reason that your food didn't taste so good when you ate it, when you bought it, was because that's like that's a commercial batch of food that they make, and so the quality of the food that they had wasn't as good. And so the reason that the food didn't taste good when it came out of their freeze dryer was because it didn't taste good when it went into their freeze dryer. So the nice thing about this is that the quality of the food that we make, either our green chili or our soups or any of that, so the taste is just incredible. It really is surprising to see how good it still tastes. You're so used to store-bought things, setting your preconceived notions as to how things might taste, that when you actually do it yourself, and it's so much better. So I have absolutely no issues with the quality of the food that comes out. So you're going to make great food, right? It's just going to take a while. It's going to take 24 to 32 or maybe longer, depending on how much moisture's in the load. It's going to take that many hours to process the food. You got to do the maintenance on it, and you can kind of check to see how well your pump's doing too, because on the side of this unit there's a USB port. And that USB port, you can stick a thumb drive in there, and it'll record every minute the pressure and the temperature of the inside of that chamber. So you can kind of review that later if you tend to be kind of on the geeky side like I am, and look to see how this thing is doing. How well is the pump doing? So if your load number 200 is still pulling 20 millitorrs or whatever as its maximum vacuum, your pump is in really great shape. So learn how to use the USB port. In terms of the vacuum pump itself, in filling the oil, some people have said, oh my gosh, it's such a pain to get the right amount of oil in. Well, on the side of the vacuum pump is a sight glass, and the sight glass has 2 lines on either side, and you pour oil in it until the oil reaches the level of those lines, and then you're done. I think people get in trouble because when you start to fill that up, the oil in that sight glass doesn't move at all. And then it doesn't start to move until you're very close to being at the end of filling it with oil. And so people start pouring oil, it's not moving, and they just go ahead and really put it in there, and it overfills. So the trick is to add oil at a moderate rate, and then as it fills, and if you start to see the oil start to rise up in that sight glass, slow down or stop, and then just kind of splash in and just put in maybe a tablespoon or 2 tablespoons at a time until that oil level reaches the sight level line, and it lets you know that it's full. If you overfill it and you turn the pump on, it's gonna throw oil out the discharge port on the top of the unit. This has a new oil capture canister on the top of the pump that actually works really well. But if you overfill the unit, you are going to douse your walls with oil. So just use a little bit of care and caution, and it'll be fine. So when it's done and you've processed all your food, one of the things this thing does is you don't have to be right there to pull the food out, because it'll go into a refrigeration mode, and it'll hold the vacuum on it. It goes into refrigeration mode, and it just kind of waits for you. So it'll refrigerate the food until you can pull it out. Then, so you release the pressure. There's a valve on the side that allows you to drain the water, and you'll put it into a defrost mode. The defrost mode requires that the unit be tipped back just a little bit. And so that's a little bit of a double-edged sword. And that's what you might notice. I have a level here. So I use that level to make sure that the unit is level when I'm processing food, because that allows me to fill the trays completely. Because if it's tipped back, I can't fill the tray completely if it's a liquid. But then once I so I want to process it with the trays flat. But when I defrost it, I've got to tip towards the back, because that's where the drain port is at in the back of the unit. Okay, so I actually do that. So I've got it setting level when it's processing, and I do that because you can see my high-tech way of putting some notebooks under the rear wheels, and that holds it level. And then when I go to defrost, I pull the cart forward, it rolls off the notebooks, tips back, and all the water drains out the back and out the backside through the port and into my gallon collection jug down there. So things you're going to need as your unit's coming in, if it's being shipped, you can get these ahead of time. I like to have a level. You don't need a giant framing level like this. You could just use a small bullet level at Harbor Freight or whatever. You need a cart or something if you plan to go that route. Go ahead and get extra oil. You can also order this online, vacuum pump oil online. Get a funnel, because you're going to need a funnel in order to fill the vacuum pump. And then we keep a logbook, so I know how many batches of what type of food, how long it took, how much water was captured, and that allows me to stay on top of my maintenance so that I can go ahead and know when to clean the pump. And you're going to drain, filter, water separate the oil every time. And after you get done doing a defrost, this plastic cover, which is the better part of an inch thick, is going to have some condensation on it. And you want to use caution in cleaning this cover, because you don't want it to get scratched, because you depend on the smooth surface of this cover to mate with this rubber gasket in order to protect the integrity of the seal, so that when you pull the vacuum, it can pull a full vacuum. So that's pretty much it. So far I'm impressed with the unit. I really enjoy the quality of the food that comes out of it. I think what I'm going to do, I'll probably do maybe a tips and tricks video, and then maybe a packaging video, because I found a easy way to use Mylar bags with a cheapy vacuum sealer that works really well. And I guess that's it. I'm Prepper Fred, and I hope that this video has helped you with your decision in purchasing a Harvest Right freeze dryer. Have a good day. Bye.